In the late 1800s, something strange began happening in America's oil industry. Refineries were disappearing, prices were collapsing, entire businesses were being wiped out. Overnight. No natural disaster, no war, no single event anyone could point to. And yet, an entire industry was being quietly reorganized until one name kept appearing again and again: John D. Rockefeller. He wasn't drilling oil, he wasn't discovering it, but somehow he was controlling it. By 1902, his fortune was estimated at around $200 million, roughly 1.5% of the entire US economy at the time. And more importantly, he controlled nearly 90% of oil refining in the United States. Not production, not discovery, refining. And that distinction changed everything. Because Rockefeller understood something others didn't. The secret of success is to do the common things uncommonly well. This is the story of John D. Rockefeller. He was born on July 8, 1839, in Richford, New York, not into wealth, not into stability, but into contradiction. His father, William Avery Rockefeller, lived a double life, a traveling salesman who often posed as a doctor, selling fake cures, inventing identities, disappearing for weeks, sometimes months. He once told his son, "I cheat my boys every chance I get. I want to make them sharp." It wasn't affection, it was a lesson. The world, in his father's eyes, was something to manipulate. But inside the same home, there was another force entirely. His mother, Eliza Davison Rockefeller, was deeply religious, disciplined, and controlled. She stretched every dollar, tracked every expense, demanded structure in a life that otherwise had none. Where his father taught unpredictability, his mother enforced order. And between those two extremes, Rockefeller developed something rare, a need for control in a world that didn't offer it. As a child, he began keeping ledgers, not casually, precisely. He recorded every cent earned, every cent spent, every loan, every repayment. He even lent small amounts of money to neighbors, charging interest, tracking returns. At an age when most children played, he was studying behavior, because numbers, unlike people, didn't lie. And over time, those numbers began to reveal something deeper: patterns, consistency, predictability. And Rockefeller realized, if something could be measured, it could be understood. And if it could be understood, it could be controlled. At 16, he entered the workforce in Cleveland, Ohio, one of the fastest growing commercial hubs in America at the time. But getting there wasn't easy. He spent 6 weeks searching for a job, walking from office to office, rejected repeatedly. Later, he would call it the most important period of my life, because it taught him persistence under pressure. Eventually, he was hired by Hewitt and Tuttle salary, $16 a month. But the money didn't matter. The system did. Inside that office, Rockefeller was exposed to the mechanics of commerce, how goods moved across states, how credit was extended, how payments were delayed, how businesses balanced survival. And what he discovered there would define everything that came next. Businesses didn't fail because they lacked profit. They failed because of timing. Money came in too late. Expenses went out too early. And in that gap, companies collapsed, quietly, predictably, over and over again. That's when Rockefeller began to think differently, not about making money, but about controlling the flow of it. Years later, he would say, "I always tried to turn every disaster into an opportunity." At 20 years old, he stopped observing the system and decided to enter it. He co-founded Clark and Rockefeller in 1859. The same year, everything changed, because in Pennsylvania, Edwin Drake struck oil, and what followed was not an industry, but a frenzy. Men rushed in from across the country. Wells appeared overnight, money poured in. At first it looked like opportunity. Oil prices soared, fortunes were made quickly. But there was no structure, no coordination, no control. Production exploded beyond demand, and the system collapsed. Prices fell from around $20 per barrel to less than $1. Entire operations failed, Investors lost everything. Panic spread. But Rockefeller didn't panic. He analyzed. Because what he saw wasn't failure. It was inefficiency. And inefficiency is where opportunity lives. While others chased oil in the ground, he asked a different question. Where is oil actually made valuable? Not when it's discovered, not when it's extracted, but when it's refined. Because crude oil by itself had limited use. It needed to be transformed into kerosene, the primary source of lighting in a world before electricity. That transformation was the real bottleneck, the real leverage point. So Rockefeller made a decision that separated him from everyone else. He stayed out of drilling, too unpredictable, too dependent on luck. Instead, he focused on refining, where systems could be controlled. He partnered with Samuel Andrews, a skilled chemist. And together, they didn't just build a refinery. They redesigned how refining worked. At the time, most refineries wasted nearly half of every barrel. Rockefeller saw waste as lost profit, so he optimized everything. From a single barrel of oil, they extracted kerosene, lubricating oils, paraffin, wax, petroleum, jelly. Nothing wasted, everything monetized. This dramatically increased margins, while competitors struggled to stay afloat. He once said, "Do not be afraid to give up the good to go for the great." And this was that moment, because he wasn't just improving a business, he was perfecting a system. Then he expanded, not outward, first, but inward. He began controlling every part of the process surrounding oil: barrels, storage facilities, pipelines, transportation, and eventually, railroads. At the time, railroads were the only efficient way to move large quantities of oil. They were the choke point. So Rockefeller negotiated deals that no one else had: lower shipping rates, priority access, and most critically, rebates. But there was something even more powerful hidden inside those agreements: drawbacks, which meant when his competitors shipped oil, Rockefeller received a portion of that money. They were funding his growth without realizing it. At that moment, competition stopped being fair, because he wasn't just operating within the system anymore. He was reshaping it. Then came the move that would define his dominance: Cleveland, the center of oil refining at the time. Rockefeller approached refinery owners one by one. The offer was simple: sell or compete. Some accepted immediately, others refused. They believed they could survive independently. They believed the market would balance itself. It didn't. Prices dropped, aggressively, sustained, relentless. Rockefeller could afford losses. They couldn't. Weeks passed, pressure mounted, and one by one, those same owners returned, this time to sell. By the end of it, 22 out of 26 refineries in Cleveland were under his control. This event would later be called the Cleveland Massacre, not because of violence, but because of inevitability. Because Rockefeller understood something fundamental. The way to make money is to buy when blood is running in the streets. He didn't need to destroy his competitors. He only needed to outlast them. By 1879, Standard Oil controlled nearly 90% of oil refining in the United States. Oil didn't just pass through markets anymore. It passed through him. Standard Oil became more than a company. It became infrastructure, a system so integrated that avoiding it became nearly impossible. But power at that scale creates resistance, and eventually, someone begins to investigate. Ida Tarbell. Her father had once been driven out of the oil business. She understood the cost of Rockefeller's system, and she spent years documenting it, carefully, relentlessly, publishing a series of articles that exposed secret railroad deals, price manipulation, systematic elimination of competition. For the first time, the public saw the system behind the success. And once people understand power, they begin to challenge it. Pressure built, public opinion shifted, and the government acted. Using the Sherman Antitrust Act, the case reached the Supreme Court. Standard Oil Company of New Jersey versus United States, Standard Oil Company of New Jersey versus United States. The ruling: Standard Oil must be broken apart. 34 separate companies. It looked like the end, but it wasn't. Because Rockefeller didn't lose control of his wealth. He owned shares in all the new companies, and as they grew independently, his wealth multiplied. What looked like destruction became expansion, fragmentation became leverage. Rockefeller once said, competition is a sin, not emotionally, structurally, because he understood something deeper than business itself. If you control the system, you don't need to compete within it, you define it. And that idea didn't end with oil. Today the industries are different: technology, finance, platforms. But the logic remains the same. Control the infrastructure, control the flow, control the system. And whether you realize it or not, you are still operating inside a world shaped by that same blueprint.